Hi, I'm Jerry Sparks, president of AG Financial Insurance, and we're here for Risk Management Live, and we have some church decision makers here. We're happy to be with Hope Church, and actually we appreciate Pastor Gary letting us use his facility here for this Risk Management Live. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our panel, our distinguished panel. We have Rich Hammar. Rich Hammar is General Counsel for the General Counsel of the Assemblies of God, and my partner in all of these Risk Management Lives. Rich, thanks for being with us again. We have Gary Hay, who is the lead pastor here at Hope Church. We've got Tom Demers, which is the executive pastor from High Street. And we have Carter McDaniel, the business administrator at Central Assembly of God. So thanks, guys, for being with us. Thanks for letting us use your facility.
Sure, no problem.
If you have questions while we're doing this program, feel free to email me at the bottom of the screen where you're watching this, and we'll go ahead and try to get to your questions. I know that these guys have lots of questions that we're going to try to get through, and then we're going to try to do a lot of comparison of how each church does things, so you know how to do things better. So we're going to start off right with that, and I think, Carter, you were going to ask the first question.
Yeah, Jerry, I think for all of us here, a primary concern is keeping our people in our ministry safe, and right hand in hand with that is keeping the ministries we serve out of the courtroom. So I kind of was wondering what would be one of the main reasons that churches land in court, and Rich, maybe you could comment on if you're seeing a change in the amount of litigation involving churches.
Yeah, okay, Carter, let me, like a good presidential candidate in one of their debates, you never answer the question that's asked. You answer the question you wish they would have. So that's what I'm going to do. We'll start with the question, is church litigation exploding? Are we having more cases than we've had in the past? And I don't know that anybody perhaps knows the answer to that question better than I do, because for the last 15 years, I've read every case decided in the country, all 50 states, all federal courts, pertaining to religious organizations. And the numbers have been constant. So I think that's probably maybe the best evidence. Now, I'm not talking about claims made. You might get a little bit different picture, Jerry, looking at insurance records, but I'm talking about actual litigation. And that number has been pretty constant, plus or minus 10% maybe. In terms of your question, Carter, what is the leading cause of litigation? That's been true for 7 of the last 8 years. It's been child molestation, sexual abuse of a minor. So the idea that's a risk that's going away simply is not true. And I think sometimes churches experience fatigue with this issue. We've been committed to this for so long. Can't we lighten up? And the answer is no. The evidence is clear. This remains the biggest legal risk churches in America face. So it would be well, I think, for church leaders to periodically reevaluate, reassess what they're doing, make sure you're in compliance with your policies, because the worst position you can possibly be in is having effective policies that are not implemented fully. That's going to be the worst position legally, you can possibly be in. So that's the number one risk.
Let's just talk about minimizing that risk. So we know that, Rich, I know that we see, working with the insurance for the Assemblies of God, I know that we see, we've seen an uptick in actual lawsuits filed, but a lot of that could be because of the economy and that sort of stuff. But let's talk about minimizing how we can minimize the liability with a minor. So
yeah,
let's start with a written application. Mm-hmm. So if you have your volunteers having a written application filled out, okay? In that written application, you should be getting permission to run a background check. Mm-hmm. And you want to talk about what goes into that background check?
Yeah, well, that would be like the second step. The first step's the written application in terms of risk management. And I think the second step is an interview.
Right.
If you don't really know this person well. Why do you want to be involved in some capacity in the church involving youth or minors? And that's what we're talking about here. And then number 3, which I think is the most important ingredient in risk management in this context, is doing reference checks. And I don't mean reference checks from people you've never heard of before. I see churches do this all the time. They get references. Here's a church in Missouri, and they do reference checks on this guy that wants to teach kindergarten. that comes in off the street with sunglasses and a trench coat and wants to work with children. You never heard of it. Oh, good, you're an answer to our prayer. And you put them to work right away. You know, the best way to screen somebody like that is not even a criminal records check, which will recommend here shortly, but it's an institutional reference. And by institutional reference, I don't mean an individual reference. I mean a reference from another institution where this person has worked with minors. Who better to evaluate this person's fitness for working with minors than some other organization that has used him with minors? And that's going to be another church or churches. That's going to be scouts. That's going to be teaching, coaching. There's any number of ways people are. It's rare for somebody to say out of the blue, well, I want to start working with minors. Usually people have a record and they've worked in other facilities. And so to get 2 or 3 of those other organizations and that have observed this person, maybe other churches in your community in some cases, and get a reference from them. The ultimate question is, do you know of any reason why this person would not be suitable for working with minors in our church? And if you have 3 or 4 of these entities say no, that's the gold standard. You can't beat that. Now, but what happens is churches just get references from people. You know, the FBI has done a profile on child molesters, and it's in its 4th edition now. Kenneth Lanning, a retired agent, was the primary author, and he lists several factors that, you know, it's impossible to determine if somebody's a child molester, but there are certain factors that indicate a disposition in that direction. And one of the factors he mentions is the only adult friends of pedophiles tend to be other pedophiles. And so what are they going to do? They're going to list their pedophile friends as references. They may be in different states, and you get a reference from, oh, this guy's wonderful working with children. That is not only worthless, but it's dangerous. And that's why I disclaim personal references, and you must get institutional reference. If a person, in fact, has never worked with minors before, that's a red flag. But in that case, you're left with references that are individuals, but I would limit it to members of your congregation at that point, not unknown people.
Let's go ahead and talk about, you know, using members of your congregation. How long should they be a member of your congregation before you would think that they should be used?
That's the 4th risk management principle. You know, we've talked about the application, we've talked about the interview, we've talked about the institutional references. The 4th component, I think, is what I call the 6-month rule. I've called it that for 20 years. And, you know, people quibble over, well, you know, can we make it just attending the church for 6 months? I have always adopted the rule of membership for 6 months. If you want to make it a year, that's fine with me. But the person is subjected to the discipline of the church. And and furthermore, it takes a period of time for the person to qualify for membership. So you have more time to observe this person, and that's what you want to be able to share if there's a case of child molestation, and you're sued for negligence in selecting this person. It just is going to help you, as opposed to taking a person off the street, giving them 30 days attending the church sporadically. That's the other end of the spectrum. And so I have followed that rule. Now, there will be certain exceptions to that. For example, if it's going to be a paid employee, let's say a children's pastor, they're not going to be a member of the church for 6 months. But we're talking here predominantly about volunteer workers, which is the preponderance of people that work with minors.
Let's go back to a background check. What should actually be in that background check?
Well, here we're talking about criminal records checks largely. And I think the 2 principal components of it, and this is really the, are we up to number 5 now?
Yeah.
The criminal records check, in my opinion, is twofold. You need to do a national criminal file, and you need to do a national sex offender public registry check to see if this person's on a sex offender registry, not in your state, but nationwide, which looks at all 50 states simultaneously. And those are the 2 critical components. And you know, there are a number of companies now that do these components for a relatively minor charge, under $10 per person. And so that is something that we recommend. Some churches think that just doing the criminal records checks are enough. And you know, we've talked about a case before in this program where a church hired somebody as a pastor who had been a pastor in Maryland and Alabama, had molested children in both churches. The churches dealt with it as a matter of internal discipline. And So they didn't do they did a criminal records check. In the third church, which was in Florida, that hired this guy, they did a criminal records check, and nothing turned up, because those churches in Alabama and Maryland, where he had molested children, they dealt with this as an issue of internal discipline. They didn't report it to the authorities, and so the guy had no criminal record. And so a court ruled, and in fact it was a $12.5 million verdict, that doing the criminal records check was not enough. That was negligent on your part. Yes, that's an important component, but it's not the only component. You should have, in addition, done a reference check. Contact those prior churches. The pastors of those churches said they would have acknowledged what had happened. And the molestation in the church in Florida would have never happened. So I think that's important to recognize that as important as the criminal records check is, it's part of this basket of recommendations that we're making here today.
Well, let's go right on to number 6 then, the 2 adult rules. So never let a child be alone with one adult. Always make sure.
One child alone with one adult.
Correct.
Yeah, because it's typical for Sunday school classes of children, for example, to have multiple children with one adult, and that's the public school model. You go to your public school down the street, and you go into a 3rd grade classroom. There's 30 kids and 1 teacher. That doesn't violate. I mean, why some churches think, well, we have to have 2 adults in every classroom. If that's what you want to do, if you have the manpower to do it, go for it. But it's just it's an excessive principle that is not necessary. I think if you align your practices with the public schools, that's the state. That's a state instrumentality. So you're demonstrating the exercise of reasonable care, I think, if you follow the state principle. And the state principle is not having 2 adults present in classrooms, although some do.